Walter Hayes had been building things with his hands for 73 years, but on this particular Tuesday morning, he stood in his empty workshop wondering if he had anything left to build. The morning light filtered through dusty windows, illuminating workbenches that had once been cluttered with projects and purpose. His wife Margaret had been gone for 8 months now, and without her gentle suggestions for birdhouses and garden planters, Walter found himself surrounded by tools that felt suddenly foreign in his weathered hands. The garage workshop had been his sanctuary for decades, a place where rough lumber transformed into furniture that would outlast generations. Every corner held memories of Christmas presents carved with love, rocking chairs that had soothed crying babies, and intricate jewelry boxes that had held teenage treasures. But now the silence felt heavier than the humid summer air, broken only by the distant sound of children playing in the park across the street. Walter walked slowly to his workbench, running his fingers across the smooth surface, worn down by years of dedicated craft. A half-finished project sat exactly where he had left it 3 weeks ago, a small wooden truck that had been intended for his grandson's birthday. But Danny lived 2 states away with his mother, Walter's daughter Sarah, who called dutifully every Sunday, but visited rarely. The geographical distance felt smaller than the emotional gulf that had opened after Margaret's funeral, when grief had made Walter withdraw from everyone who tried to help. The sound of arguing voices drifted through the open garage door, and Walter looked up to see 2 boys walking past his driveway. They appeared to be around 12 and 14, their clothes clean but ill-fitting in the way that suggested hand-me-downs rather than careful selection. The older boy was trying to convince the younger one of something, his voice carrying the authority of someone forced to grow up too quickly. "It's just until Mrs. Patterson finds us a permanent place," the older boy was saying. "The group home isn't that bad." "I don't want another family," the younger boy replied, his voice thick with the kind of hurt that Walter recognized from his own childhood. "They always send us back anyway." Walter had been 8 years old when his own father died in a factory accident, leaving his mother to raise 3 children during the Depression. He understood the particular kind of uncertainty that came with not knowing where you would sleep next month, the way it made you guard your heart against hope that might be broken again. Without fully deciding to do so, Walter found himself walking toward the boys. The older one noticed him first, straightening his shoulders in a defensive posture that spoke of too many encounters with adults who saw him as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be understood. "You boys live around here?" Walter asked, his voice gentler than it had been in months. "Temporarily," the older boy replied carefully. "We're staying with Mrs. Patterson while social services finds us a placement." Walter knew Mrs. Patterson, a kind widow who lived 3 blocks away and had been taking in emergency foster placements for years. He had built her a larger dining table 2 years ago, when she explained that she needed to seat more children for holiday meals. "I'm Walter," he said, extending his hand to the older boy. "I live right here." "I'm Marcus," the boy replied, accepting the handshake with surprising firmness. "This is my brother Tyrone." Tyrone hung back slightly, his eyes darting between Walter's face and the open garage workshop behind him. Walter followed his gaze and saw the boy's attention caught by the partially completed wooden truck on the workbench. "You like to build things?" Walter asked Tyrone directly. The younger boy shrugged, but Walter caught the quick flash of interest before it was carefully hidden. "I used to watch my dad work on cars before." Tyrone's voice trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished in the way that children do when the truth is too complicated or too painful to explain. "Well," Walter said, making a decision that surprised him, "I've got more projects in there than I know what to do with. Could probably use some help if you're interested." Marcus's expression remained cautious, but Tyrone took a half step toward the garage. "What kind of projects?" Walter led them into the workshop, watching their faces as they took in the organized chaos of tools, lumber, and half-finished creations. Tyrone moved immediately toward the wooden truck, his fingers hovering just above its surface without quite touching. "Go ahead," Walter said. "It won't break." Tyrone picked up the truck carefully, turning it over in his hands to examine the joints and wheels. "The axles are perfectly straight," he observed with surprising technical knowledge. "Good eye," Walter replied. "You know something about woodworking?" "My dad taught me some stuff before he got sick," Tyrone said, then quickly added, "But that was a long time ago." Marcus watched the interaction with the protective wariness of an older brother who had learned to shield his sibling from disappointment. "We should probably get back," he said. "Mrs. Patterson will worry." But Walter could see that Tyrone was reluctant to leave, his attention drawn to the various projects scattered around the workshop. An idea began forming in Walter's mind, growing from the same instinct that had guided him through decades of teaching his own children to use tools safely and creating things they could be proud of. "Tell you what," Walter said, "I'm usually out here in the mornings around 10. If you boys ever want to learn how to finish this truck, or maybe start something of your own, you're welcome to stop by." Marcus looked skeptical, but Tyrone's face lit up with an expression Walter hadn't seen since his own grandchildren were small. "Really? You'd teach us?" "I'd like that," Walter realized. And it was true. The workshop that had felt so empty suddenly seemed full of possibility again. Over the following weeks, the boys began showing up regularly. At first, Marcus remained suspicious, sitting on the periphery while Tyrone threw himself into learning basic woodworking techniques. Walter started them with simple projects, teaching them to measure twice and cut once, to respect the tools that could either create or injure, to understand that good work required patience and attention to detail. But as the days passed, Walter began to understand that he was teaching them much more than woodworking. These boys had been bounced between homes and families, never staying anywhere long enough to develop deep attachments or master complex skills. The workshop offered them something they had rarely experienced, the opportunity to start a project and see it through to completion, to make mistakes without being discarded, to build something that would last. Tyrone proved to have natural talent, his hands steady and his eye accurate. He finished the wooden truck within a week and immediately asked to start something more challenging. Walter set him to work on a simple jewelry box, teaching him to cut dovetail joints and sand surfaces to silk smoothness. The boy approached each task with intense concentration, as if the act of creation could somehow rebuild the stability that had been torn from his life. Marcus remained more guarded, but Walter noticed him paying close attention to the lessons, occasionally offering suggestions or pointing out potential problems. When Walter finally convinced him to try working on a project of his own, Marcus chose to build a bookshelf, practical and sturdy rather than decorative. "Reading helps me think," Marcus explained when Walter asked about the choice, "but we never stay anywhere long enough to unpack books properly." Walter understood. The bookshelf wasn't just furniture, it was hope made tangible, a statement of faith that someday Marcus would have a permanent place to put it. As summer deepened, the workshop became a refuge for both boys and Walter. The routine of morning work sessions gave structure to Walter's days while providing the brothers with a safe space where they could simply be children learning a craft. Walter found himself looking forward to their arrival each morning, the way their presence brought life back to corners of the garage that had been gathering dust. But Walter also began to learn about the complexities of the foster care system, the bureaucratic maze that determined where the boys could live and for how long. Mrs. Patterson was getting older, and her license only allowed her to provide temporary emergency care. Social Services was actively searching for a long-term placement that could keep the brothers together, but options were limited. The boys tried to hide their anxiety about the uncertain future, but Walter could see it in the way Marcus sometimes stopped mid-project to stare out the window, or how Tyrone would work on details with almost frantic intensity, as if perfect craftsmanship could somehow guarantee his security. One morning in late August, Marcus arrived at the workshop alone, his face set in the careful blankness that Walter had learned meant bad news. "Where's Tyrone?" Walter asked. "Social worker came yesterday," Marcus said, his voice flat. "Found us a placement. Different family, though. They can only take one kid." Walter set down his coffee cup carefully, processing the implications. "They're separating you?" Marcus nodded, his composure beginning to crack. "Tyrone goes to a family in Riverside. I'm supposed to go to a group home downtown. They say it's temporary, just until they find something better." "When?" "Tomorrow." Walter felt something break inside his chest, a sharp pain that reminded him of losing Margaret. In just a few weeks, these boys had become part of his daily life, part of what made the workshop feel like home again. The thought of them being separated, of Tyrone losing the stability that had helped him flourish, was unbearable. "There has to be something we can do," Walter said. But even as he spoke, he knew how powerless civilians were against the machinery of bureaucracy. Marcus shrugged with the defeated acceptance of someone who had learned not to fight battles he couldn't win. "It's fine. We've been split up before. Tyrone's young enough. He'll adapt." But Walter could see that it wasn't fine, that Marcus was breaking apart behind his protective facade. These brothers had only each other, and the system was about to take that away too. That afternoon, Walter did something he hadn't done since Margaret's illness. He made phone calls. He called his daughter Sarah, explaining the situation and asking for advice about legal options. He called the pastor at his church, seeking guidance about advocacy resources. He even called his lawyer, wondering about emergency fostering procedures. What he learned was both encouraging and daunting. The state needed foster families desperately, especially those willing to take sibling groups. The approval process was extensive, but could be expedited in emergency situations. At 73, Walter's age might be a concern, but his financial stability and clean background would work in his favor. More importantly, he learned that if he began the application process immediately and could demonstrate that the boys were already thriving in his care, social services might consider allowing them to stay temporarily while his application was processed. Walter spent that evening in his workshop, surrounded by the projects the boys had been working on. Tyrone's jewelry box sat nearly finished on the workbench, needing only final sanding and a coat of varnish. Marcus's bookshelf was taking shape, its clean lines speaking to his practical nature and attention to detail. These weren't just wooden screws. They were evidence of growth, stability, and hope. By morning, Walter had made his decision. When the boys arrived for what they thought would be their final workshop session, he was waiting with papers from the Department of Children and Family Services. "I want to talk to you both about something," Walter said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was proposing. "How would you feel about staying here with me while I apply to become your foster father?" The question hung in the air like sawdust after a cut, settling slowly as both boys processed what he was offering. Tyrone's face lit up immediately, but Marcus's expression remained guarded. "You don't know what you're getting into," Marcus said quietly. "We're not easy kids. We've got history." "So do I," Walter replied. "Lost my dad when I was about your age. Spent some time in places that weren't quite home. I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong anywhere." "But you're old," Tyrone said with the brutal honesty of childhood. "What if something happens to you?" Walter smiled, touched by the boy's concern. "That's a fair question. I'm healthier than I look, and I've got family who would make sure you're taken care of. But mostly I think we could take care of each other." The conversation with social services was more complex than Walter had anticipated. His age was indeed a concern, as was his lack of recent experience with children. But the fact that the boys were already thriving in his care, combined with the desperate need for emergency placement, worked in their favor. The caseworker, a tired woman named Ms. Rodriguez, who had seen too many children shuffled between inadequate situations, was willing to consider alternatives to separation. The temporary arrangement was approved while Walter's formal application was processed. The boys moved their few belongings into Margaret's old sewing room, which Walter had hastily converted into a bedroom with twin beds and a shared dresser. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and for the first time in years, they had the security of knowing they wouldn't be moving again tomorrow. The adjustment period was challenging in ways Walter hadn't fully anticipated. He had forgotten how much energy children required, how many decisions needed to be made about everything from breakfast cereal to bedtime routines. Marcus tested boundaries with the suspicious wariness of someone who had learned that adults often made promises they couldn't keep. Tyrone threw himself into the new arrangement with such desperate enthusiasm that Walter worried he was setting himself up for heartbreak if things didn't work out. But gradually, they developed routines that worked for all of them. Morning workshop time remained sacred, a place where they could focus on creating rather than worrying about the future. Afternoons were for homework, with Walter discovering that both boys were far more intelligent than their school records suggested. Evenings were for quiet activities, reading or watching television, or simply talking about their days. The formal approval process took 6 months, 6 months of home visits and interviews and background checks that examined every aspect of Walter's life and character. Both boys had to meet with counselors and social workers, answering questions about whether they felt safe and wanted to stay. The uncertainty was stressful for everyone, but it also gave them time to become a real family rather than just an emergency arrangement. During this period, the workshop became more than just a place to learn woodworking. It became a symbol of permanence and growth. Walter taught the boys advanced techniques, helping them create pieces they could be genuinely proud of. Tyrone completed a beautiful chess set, each piece carved with intricate detail that spoke to his growing confidence and skill. Marcus finished his bookshelf and immediately began filling it with books checked out from the library, a sign that he was finally allowing himself to believe in tomorrow. But perhaps more importantly, the boys began teaching Walter things he hadn't realized he needed to learn. Marcus showed him how to navigate the online world that had mystified him since Margaret's death, helping him stay connected with his daughter and grandson. Tyrone brought energy and laughter back into a house that had been too quiet for too long. Together, they reminded Walter that age was just a number, that there was still time for new beginnings and unexpected joys. The day the final approval came through, Walter found both boys in the workshop, working on a surprise project they had been hiding from him for weeks. It was a wooden sign for the garage door, carefully carved and painted with the words, Hayes Family Workshop. Underneath, in smaller letters, they had added, Where broken things get fixed. Walter stood looking at the sign, understanding that it meant more than just their approval to stay. It was a declaration that they had chosen each other, that family wasn't just about blood or legal documents, but about commitment and love and the willingness to build something together. The workshop continued to evolve as the boys grew. They began taking on more complex projects, selling some of their work at local craft fairs to save money for college. Word spread about the quality of their craftsmanship, and soon they had steady orders for custom furniture and decorative pieces. More importantly, they began teaching other children, sharing their skills with foster kids who came to visit Mrs. Patterson, or with neighborhood children who needed positive activities during summer breaks. Walter watched with pride as Marcus and Tyrone developed into confident young men who understood the value of hard work and craftsmanship. Marcus earned a scholarship to study engineering, his analytical mind perfectly suited to designing structures that would last. Tyrone chose art school, his natural talent for detail and design flowering into genuine artistic ability. But even as they prepared to leave for college, both boys made it clear that the workshop would always be their home base. They helped Walter establish it as an official nonprofit program, the Hayes Family Workshop, dedicated to teaching woodworking skills to children in foster care. The program provided not just technical training, but also the kind of stable, supportive environment that could help heal the wounds left by unstable childhoods. On the day Marcus left for college, he presented Walter with a wooden picture frame he had made, containing a photo of the three of them in the workshop. "For when you miss us too much," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Tyrone, leaving a week later, gave Walter a small wooden heart. "I carved this the first day you taught us," he explained. "I wanted you to have it back because you gave me yours." Alone again in the workshop, Walter found that the silence felt different than it had after Margaret's death. This was the quiet of completion rather than emptiness, the pause between chapters rather than the end of the story. The workshop was ready for new students, new projects, new opportunities to transform lives through the simple act of creating something beautiful from raw materials. Walter picked up his tools and began preparing for the next group of children who would arrive the following week. 3 brothers this time, ages 9 through 13, who needed to learn that they were worth investing in, that their hands could create rather than destroy, that family could be chosen as well as given. As he worked, Walter thought about the unexpected turns his life had taken, how grief had led to isolation, which had led to connection, which had led to love he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. He thought about Margaret, who would have loved Marcus and Tyrone like her own grandchildren, who would have understood that the workshop had become exactly what it was meant to be, a place where broken things got fixed, where lost children found themselves, and where an old man discovered that it was never too late to build something that would outlast him. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating sawdust that danced in the air like golden snow. Walter smiled, picked up a piece of rough lumber, and began planning his next project. There was work to be done, children to teach, and a future to build, one careful cut at a time.